Story recapped here. Today I'm going to explain a comedy, drama, and fantasy film called Welcome to Marwen, which is based on a true story. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. In the sky above Belgium during World War II, Captain Hoagie pilots a warplane but gets surrounded by the enemy planes. One of the wings gets hit, which causes his plane to lose control. Panicking, he crashes the plane into a swamp to escape. The doll figure Hoagie emerges from the crash with his boots on fire, so he dips his burning boots into the mud to douse the flames. With only cloth wrapped around his soles, he wanders off and sees a vehicle turned on its side, deserted by its German passengers. He walks cautiously toward the vehicle and finds a pair of Oxford pumps in a suitcase. Without care, Hoagie wears the pumps and walks along the bushes. A German soldier emerges, prompting Hoagie to draw his gun and aim at the enemy. But to his surprise, 4 more soldiers appear with firearms pointing at him. The enemies, all doll figures too, order him to throw away his gun and step forward. When he steps out and heals, the soldiers jeer and laugh. The soldiers move closer to Hoagie, so Hoagie kicks one of them in the crotch. The soldier retaliates by taking a swipe at Hoagie's face with a knife, wounding him across the right eye. The men beat Hoagie up, and it continues until 6 women, all doll figures, open fire on them. Then, one of the women in braids walks up to Hoagie and introduces herself as Wendy. With a sense of relief, she declares he is saved. Moments later, the shoot stops. Mark Hogancamp, the real-life Hoagie, adjusts the camera and again takes a snapshot of the 2 dolls. Mark collects his dolls and goes to the basement, where miniature furniture and beds are on display. He puts a veil on Wendy, the doll in braids, and places her in a box together with the other doll figures he considers dead. Then, Mark takes the green-haired doll, Deja Thoris, from an altar placed high above a wall. Outside his window, Mark hears a honking sound. A red-haired woman named Nicole alights from her car. She is his new neighbor, and she's beautiful. Mark uses a binocular to peep through his window. Another car arrives, and Kurt gets out. Nicole looks unhappy, but she composes herself and asks him to leave. Meanwhile, someone knocks on Mark's door. It's Anna, his Russian caregiver, with groceries and mail in her hands. She then gives Mark a timer clock to time his breathing for his anxiety. Next on her routine is to check Mark's temperature, but she never fails to ask about Captain Hoagie too. Mark candidly talks about the SS beating Hoagie again and how Wendy and the girls came to save him. Anna is surprised to hear Wendy is back in Marwen, but Mark clarifies that he only resurrected the doll for an old photograph he wanted to fix for the show. When asked about it, Mark dismisses the show exhibit as Roberta and her cousin's idea, but not going would be silly, Anna says. She brings out the medicine and asks Mark why he needs them so soon. There's a tone of doubt in her voice when Mark explains he dropped them in the sink again. Anna warns him not to take too many pills because it can be dangerous. She then checks Mark's face and body closely but remembers Julie, Mark's fellow physical therapy patient, who wanted to say hi. She hands him Julie's Rochester Marathon photo. Before leaving, Anna reminds Mark he's an artist and that he should show up at his show. Mark opens an album and places Julie's marathon photo together with her pictures during his therapy. It was 3 years ago when Julie, an amputee herself, encouraged Mark that he could walk again. Mark also looks at the news clippings in his album showing he was brutally attacked sometime earlier. Later, Mark takes several pills before listening to a voice message from his lawyer, who reminds him to attend his attacker's sentencing on Friday. The next morning, Mark fixes the bell tower in his yard, and Hoagie wakes the girls up. They drive on the road with orders to shoot anything that moves. Mark, with his toy jeep and dolls, walks to the Avalanche Roadhouse bar. Larry, the bar owner, informs Mark that Carlala is looking for him, so Mark goes to the kitchen with his toys in his arm. Larry tells a customer how Mark was attacked outside his bar and that it was a miracle he survived. Wendy, who used to tend the bar, found him the night she was on duty. Meanwhile, inside the kitchen, Carlala listens to Mark's stories about the dolls as he mops, how Deja killed Wendy because she wanted Hoagie for herself. Then, Mark asks Carlala if she still talks to Wendy, whose doll counterpart was zapped by Deja as she married Hoagie, but Carlala says she already moved to California. Mark, with his toys in tow, goes to Al's Hobby House, a toy shop. Roberta, who works there, keeps offering him a cup of coffee until Mark accepts. She comes back and invites him to a family dinner on Sunday, but again, Mark hesitates. Roberta tries warming up to him by finding the things they have in common, but he is simply not interested. Mark is actually busy looking for a red-haired glamonista, and when Roberta helps him find one, he gets elated and calls her Nicole. While paying for the doll, Roberta offers Mark a new SS General doll named Kurt Meyer, who served in the 1944 Belgium War. Mark looks distraught and makes an alibi of not being able to afford it, and when he sees his attackers on the news, he immediately leaves. One day, Nicole visits Mark and tells him she has heard about what happened, adding that he didn't deserve it. Looking around the art installation, Nicole admires the miniature church, the houses, even the curtains, and all the little details. She gasps upon seeing a group of doll soldiers torturing an all-tied-up Hoagie. Nicole is fascinated, so she asks Mark to tell Hoagie's story. Mark begins by introducing the women of Marwen, the guards of the village. They gather at the bar, but they haven't seen Hoagie since breakfast. Nicole comes in and introduces herself to the girls. She's looking for the CO, and the girls say that would be Captain Hoagie. Roberta barges in and delivers the news that Hoagie is held captive by 5 SS men who are torturing him in the church. The girls arm themselves with firearms, but Roberta says the soldiers are guarding the place and they'll kill Hoagie if they see them. Nicole, grabbing a bottle, comes up with an idea. The girls head to the church with guns behind their backs and Molotov cocktails in one hand. They light the fuse and throw the bottles at the soldiers, who have no idea what those are. The soldiers burst into flames as the girls open fire, and Nicole grabs a knife from one of the men to free Hoagie. As she sits Hoagie down, he murmurs he's saved. Their exchange of stares sparks something magical, as if they have fallen in love with each other. Hoagie is swept away by the most beautiful eyes he has ever seen, and when he looks at Nicole's black heels, he is amazed. They're called stilettos, Nicole says, and they won't be invented until 1954. Mark finishes his story without a conclusion, his eyes glued to Nicole's face. Nicole listens and sighs, unaware that Mark is staring at her. Mark receives in the mailbox the photographs of Hoagie and Nicole from the photo lab. Across the street, Nicole invites him to her house, asking him to help move a hutch. Mark obliges and parks his toy Jeep and dolls on the roadside. Then, Kurt arrives in his car and sees the art installation across the street. Meanwhile, Nicole tells Mark her brother is into stilettos and collects women's nightclothes. Mark clarifies he only collects shoes and now has 287 pairs. He doesn't want to label it as an obsessive interest, but would rather call it collecting women's essence because it helps him connect with women. Mark thinks he was a good illustrator before the attack. He can remember facts and stuff like math, but he has no memory of his personal life. All he remembers was being called queer that night and Tammy Wynette playing on the jukebox. While transferring her teapots into the hutch, Nicole shares her love for tea and plans to build a tea house now that she has a yard. She reveals she's a veterinarian tech and volunteers at an animal shelter called Under One Roof. As a token of gratitude, she hands Hoagie a bottle of wine, but he refuses and instead accepts a basket of goodies. As Mark leaves the house, Kurt taunts him with German greetings, which triggers him. Mark then runs toward his house and drops the basket. Later that day, Mark's lawyer, Johnson, comes to his house and convinces him to attend the court tomorrow. Thinking of a way out, Mark reasons he has to go to work because it's meatball day, but Johnson rejects his excuse. He has prepared a statement for Mark to read so it'll be officially entered into the court records, but Mark refuses because the statement mentions heels. Mark doesn't want to talk about it publicly, but Johnson wants to prove it's a hate crime. Mark looks at Deja on the swing and Hoagie on the floor as if asking for guidance. Then, he puts Deja back on the altar and tells Johnson he's going. The next day, Roberta brings Mark to the courthouse with his toy Jeep and dolls. A female judge presides over the case while the 5 defendants are presented in a row across the aisle. Mark notices one of his attackers with a swastika tattoo on his right arm. The judge asks Mark if he has any statement to give, when his attacker suddenly transforms into an enemy soldier and starts shooting people. Hoagie comes to life and retaliates by firing back at the other soldiers to let Mark crawl his way out of the courthouse. Unfortunately, Johnson runs to the door and sees Mark fleeing. The next day, someone knocks on the door. Nicole is outside trying to check on Mark, and she apologizes for Kurt's behavior. Mark learns Kurt is her ex-boyfriend, who was a bomb squad commander. Nicole brings Mark a bag of her old shoes, and he's happy to add them to his collection. An art journal falls off the closet, and Nicole sees Mark's World War II illustrations. Since he can no longer draw, he switches to photography to have his dolls tell his story. Nicole has googled Marwen out of curiosity and found out there's no such place in Belgium. It's made up, Mark says, because Marwen stands for Mark and Wendy. When asked if Wendy was the one who found him on the road, he goes into detail. Wendy saved Hoagie after his plane crashed, and she was the love of his life. Mark also talks about the other dolls and their real-life counterparts, saying one of them, Suzette, is his favorite actress. Nicole looks at the dolls, Hoagie and Nicole, and asks if they're making out. Mark says Nicole wants to, but Hoagie doesn't let anybody get too close because he's cursed. Nicole asks who the green-haired doll on the altar is, so Mark tells her she is Deja Thoris, the Belgian witch with a magic glove. She can zap anyone she doesn't like, but she doesn't represent anyone in real life. Nicole invites Mark on Thursday for tea time. Mark tells Nicole that from the day he saw her, he knew she was a stiletto girl, and that's why he made her wear stilettos. Nicole clarifies if Mark's talking about the doll, which makes the conversation awkward before she leaves. In Mark's imagination, Nicole kisses Hoagie, and when he freaks out, she points out nothing happens. Unfortunately, Deja screams out of jealousy and flies down to a sleeping Mark, declaring Hoagie belongs only to her. She then commands Mark to build her a time machine. Mark drops by the toy shop to ask Roberta if she has miniature teapots and cups in the shop. While looking in the section, Roberta bugs Mark if he's going to the exhibit because her cousin is in charge of printing the program details. So Mark says yes. Roberta shows him 2 miniature Purple Heart medals that fascinate him because it's just like the real thing. It must be his lucky day, because Roberta also has a full-sized Purple Heart medal that belonged to a wounded veteran. Mark visits Nicole and shows her the images where Hoagie is proposing to his Nicole in the tea house. He explains Hoagie couldn't find a ring because there was a war, so instead, he used his medal. Mark also adds that the dolls decided to get married 1 minute after midnight so they could kiss without anything bad happening. Then, Mark takes out the Purple Heart medal, gets down on one knee, and proposes to Nicole. Sadly, Nicole apologizes for not being on the same page with him. He has mistaken her intentions because she only sees him as a friend. Nicole stands up to get something for him, but Mark remains frozen on his knee. He eventually looks at the photographs again and uses the bottom of a glass to magnify the images, seeing Deja in the background. Mark goes home and confronts Deja for following him, before presenting the time machine car she wants. Outside, Nicole arrives and brings Mark a yellow plastic bag she wants to give him for his show, leaving it by the entrance. Then, Mark picks up the bag and pulls out a Kurt Meyer doll, hearing it speaking German. Screaming in fear, Mark takes the bag into his yard. Kurt Meyer crawls out of his box and sees Nicole, pointing his gun at her but not shooting. Mark gets inside his house to grab a paper bag to help him breathe. Hoagie is on the couch, asking him when he's getting rid of Deja and urging him to fight for once. They then hear a gunshot, so Mark drops to the floor and peeks at the dollhouse, where Hoagie runs outside to see Nicole lying on the ground. The girls arrive and see that the metal stopped the bullet from hitting Nicole's heart. After the girls carry Nicole to the vehicle, they take her to a room to rest. Carlala removes Nicole's shoes and hands them to Hoagie. They encourage him to remain strong while Nicole gets weaker. Hoagie kneels in a chapel and prays for Nicole, but he hears someone adjusting the barrel of a gun and turns to see a German soldier pointing a gun at him. He demands Hoagie to face him and remove his weapon. And when Hoagie steps into the aisle, the soldier is surprised to see him wearing those black stilettos. He starts shooting, but a chase ensues when Hoagie escapes. They engage in a fight on the bell tower, and Hoagie hits him with a heel in the neck. The soldier tries to attack Hoagie, but Hoagie avoids him, causing him to fall to his death. Luckily, Hoagie holds on to a nail. When Hoagie falls too, Deja comes flying with a time machine and saves him. She prepares to fly into the future, but Hoagie insists on retrieving one of Nicole's heels, which is stuck into the soldier's neck. He maneuvers the time machine to the ground to reach for the shoe. As Hoagie grabs onto Deja's arm, he accidentally pulls her glove and sees her swastika tattoo. Hoagie screams and calls Deja a spy, the one keeping the enemies alive. Realizing Deja is the personification of Mark's addiction to pills, Hoagie refuses to let her kill Mark. In the name of Marwen, Hoagie vanquishes Deja and jumps off the time machine as it speeds into the future. The enemies fighting the girls in town finally die, and Hoagie picks up the shoes and brings them to Nicole. As he leans in to kiss Nicole, the shoes are magically fitted on her. She opens her eyes and comes back to life. Mark snaps a photo of Hoagie and Nicole staring at each other. He whispers Deja is out of his life for good, pouring the pills into the sink. Finally, he throws Deja into a box with the other enemy dolls. The next day, Mark receives a message from his lawyer's office, reminding him what to wear to court. He then shows up in court and reads his statement, saying he was not wearing high heels the night he was attacked. He commented he sometimes wears them, but that comment almost cost him his life. In the end, Mark asserts his attackers can't hurt him anymore because they're gone for good. Afterward, Mark goes to the exhibit where the photos of his dolls are on display. He tells Roberta that Hoagie decided to rename the town Marwen in honor of Nicole without an E. Then, Mark tells Roberta some people aren't as fortunate as Hoagie and Nicole, and some never find true love in real life. Mark also asks Roberta to go get sushi with him, and with a smile, Roberta accepts the invitation. The real Mark Hogancamp hasn't had alcohol since the night of the attack, and the population of Marwen Call has now grown to 200.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.